So welcome to week 3 of the Better Brain Book Club. And I did this last week, just as I moved it.
I'm delighted. I mean, I am delighted to hear that there's a book club that's around my book. Wow.
I know, and not the
really
only
honored.
one. I started this after joining another one, and that was held in North America. And
the one I spoke to, that group. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
I had so many people in that book club. It was just overwhelming.
It's so good, and we've got
so thank you all for reading the book. Really delighted.
Absolutely. And we've got over 500 people in my group around connecting the dots between food and mood that access the recordings, etc. So all people that are very interested in this impact on nutrients and mental health. So you've got a nice captive audience here for sure. We had the benefit of having Dr. Bonnie Kaplan join us via pre-recorded session in week 1, and then of course Dr. Julia here tonight. Yes.
Fantastic.
So for this week, we're looking at part 2 of the book, and in particular, chapter 7, so improving resilience to trauma and stress with supplements. And I think that sounds quite relevant to many of us right now. So introducing Dr. Julia Rucklidge, Professor of Clinical Psychology in the School of Psychology, Speech and Hearing at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. And Julia, you've had so many career achievements. I know that includes a large number, over 100 and something peer-reviewed publications and textbook contributions, and have run some just fascinating clinical trials over the last decade. We shared last week in group and in the follow-up emails the links to your TEDx talk, which has had loads and loads of views, and of course running the edX short course at the moment as well, which we shared the links for previously. So I know some of the people on the call tonight have also been doing that course with you and your team as well.
Great, fantastic.
Excellent. So look, some of my favourite research of yours relates to the Christchurch earthquakes. And because I normally do my research from journals, reading this chapter was the first time that I really thought about that human aspect of you actually conducting these trials amid aftershocks, cracked roads,
exactly.
losing your house temporarily and people that you knew, and just hugely impactful there. So and then in the middle of this you ran a clinical trial. So I'm just wondering if you could start this evening by giving us a summary of the experience of this and the studies and the key findings.
Absolutely, sure. So as you mentioned, this was a very different type of research from your standard study where you end up coming up with an idea and spending a year writing about it and coming up with how you're going to test it and applying for ethics and being rejected by ethics or whatever, and just getting through all of that and trying to get money and all of that. So that's my typical way of doing a study, and it's getting worse, to be honest. The latest study that we've just launched using nutrients for adolescents took us almost 2 years to get off the ground. It's just started running right now. So it takes there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. But what happened after the September 4th earthquake, for anyone who has never been in an earthquake, that was me. I'd never been in, not a massive earthquake, maybe a few little ones in Mexico once, but nothing like what I experienced on September 4th. That was when you wake up and you're woken up by this incredible, violent, shaking noise, and then kind of going, oh my God, this is what I never wanted to have happen to me, and I'm in it. So this is an earthquake. So it was certainly a terrifying evening. It was in the middle of the night, and we had shakes all the way through the night. But I was in the middle of doing clinical trials, and we'd just gotten one of our biggest clinical trials off the ground. And I don't know when you spoke to Bonnie, if you heard a little bit about the background to the research that we've been doing. What you may know, and you also know if you've just read the intro chapter, is that this studying the idea of nutrition has not been an easy one. And we just have roadblock after roadblock all the way through of just trying to study this idea of, is nutrition relevant to the brain? And one good way of doing that is by doing it through a pill form. So, but we've had a lot of roadblocks. Journals won't accept the work, or they'll just reject it outright, not be interested in reviewing it, or you can't get money, or ethics committees will reject it, or we can't get referrals from people. And so, to be honest, when this earthquake happened, I just thought, here we go again. It's just, this research just is not supposed to be done. And it was my first randomized control trial that I was doing at that point. So, but I don't think that's why we had an earthquake at the end of the day. So, but I remembered what happened for me was that I remembered some research I'd read as a graduate student when I was doing some work on pain management with arthritis. And I came across this study where there was an earthquake in the middle of a study where they were looking at whether or not an arthritis pain management program was effective in reducing the pain associated with arthritis. And so I just, as a graduate student, it just stuck with me about how these researchers had done this, that they'd thought about, why don't we investigate this interesting question about whether or not this earthquake plays any role. And so after the earthquake, after the initial shock of what had happened, it wasn't long before I thought, what can I do? What kind of question can I answer? Because I remembered this research. And so I thought, well, we have these clinical trials going. We could look to see whether or not people who happen to be taking the nutrients at the time of that earthquake, whether or not they recovered more quickly than people who happen to not be taking nutrients at the time of the earthquake. And we had people in the studies at various different spots where they hadn't either started the study or they were finished the study and had stopped the nutrients. So we were able to find almost, it was half and half, 17 and 17. So we phoned them up because we couldn't, at that time, we obviously they couldn't come and visit us because the university was closed. Just chatted with them on the phone and administered the questionnaires over the phone. And found that those people, everyone gets stressed. That's clear. But that if you'd been taking the micronutrients, then you recovered more quickly. And so that was I thought that was quite an interesting finding. And I had no idea what we were going to find, although I was familiar with some of the research on B vitamins. And so it made, and how they can be really beneficial for stress. So it kind of, it made sense, and it fit with what we already knew. And in this case, the nutrients that we used was the broad spectrum micronutrients. At that time, we were studying Empower Plus. So after the February earthquake, though, we learned this really interesting thing from the September earthquake. Can we apply it in a different way? Can we run a randomized control trial with looking at, say, the B complex and then a different doses of Empower Plus? Because we didn't know whether or not you could get away with a lower dose. I mean, at that point, our studies we were expecting people to take 15 pills a day. And so that was for the treatment of ADHD. And so did you need 15 pills a day for the treatment of stress? And so we had a low dose, which was 4 pills a day, versus a higher dose, which was 8 pills a day. It also, another reason for doing that, though, the background to that is that if we kept the dose low, then it meant we kept it below what would be regarded as a medicine in New Zealand. And so that would make getting it through ethics much, much easier, because as soon as you go over a certain dose, they start to get twitchy, and they start thinking we're harming people, and it just makes going through the whole ethical process a lot more difficult. So that's why we decided to run it that way and not use a placebo, because it's unethical. So I don't know if I answered your question about why, the stories, but for that second study, if for me it was a horrible time in my life after that it's not the second earthquake, because we had many aftershocks, but that February 22nd earthquake I called them the dark days. And it was because our house was really badly damaged, and we couldn't live in it, and I had young children, and so I'm completely sympathetic to the challenges people have with having young children during COVID, and during the pandemic. You're trying to, keep them entertained. You've got your your own, stress to deal with the, having no house and where you're going to live and what school are they going to go to because their school was closed, and all of those issues going on. So it was a really, really stressful time. And actually, that's when I started to take nutrients. I was like, this is, and finding the huge benefit. And up until then, I thought, well, I can't take the nutrients. I study them. There's no way I could ever take these nutrients because I will be biased. And I thought, well, hold on. I've produced study after study at that point showing the benefits of the nutrients for stress. Why in the world would I not listen to this research? And so that was something that I think made the difference and allowed me to be resilient and run a really large randomized control trial in a really short period of time.
Yeah, in a really stressful situation. And I know you mentioned in the book as well that you felt like your children came through that time very well in comparison to some of the other children that or aware of issues. Did they take supplements as well during that time? Or
not at that point. They were, how old were they? They were like 6 and 7. But we started running trials not much long, maybe a couple of years later, where with children with ADHD, and I needed to teach children how to swallow pills because of that study, and we were having a really hard time with getting kids to learn how to swallow pills. So I used my kids as guinea pigs to teach them how to swallow pills, and one of them actually took forever. So but one of them just no problem, he started swallowing the pills, learned how to do it, and so I thought, well, why not? And he just continued to take about 3 to 4 a day since then. So it's been probably 10 years now where he's been doing that. So then they're now very adjusted teenagers. I can't say whether or not they would have been any different if it wasn't for that, because obviously lots of kids have done really well without having to take additional nutrients. But I think it gives a certain level of resilience for some people, and make sure that the fuel tank is full. Like your fuel tank, when you encounter enormous amounts of stress after stress after stress, that it stays elevated, like that, it stays topped up.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Because we know that muscles can store nutrients, but the brain needs this constant supply. And so we do need to keep making sure that the tank is constantly filled and not getting low.
Yeah, that's what we think. That's what I think. I think that's what those studies really taught me, was that you can overcome stress by taking nutrients, which is what that second study showed. But that first study really speaks to resilience, and that if you are entering a stressful period, if you're well nourished, you're probably going to do better than if you're running on empty.
Such an important statement. If you are entering a stressful period, that you will probably do better, just admitting someone else again there, but if you are running on a full tank rather than on empty. And we think about this in so many ways, but not always when we think about our nutrient levels. So that's powerful, just that one statement in itself. So when I think about also within the same chapter, and Dr. Bonnie set out with you guys just seemed to draw challenges to be able to conduct your trials in. So after this, she had the floods. Yeah,
that's right. And
now,
so
what was super interesting there, right, was having the vitamin B complex. That was the Douglas Laboratories one, and the broad spectrum multi-nutrients actually both showing really significant improvements.
That's right. And so, and again, just the background to that was that when that flood happened, I was in Tokyo at the time, and I learned about the flood because my in-laws lived in Calgary, and so I heard about, and their house was completely flooded and ruined by the flood, and so I contacted Bonnie and said, you have a chance of we could replicate our earthquake data with a totally different natural disaster. And so that it was that conversation, and I was just I remember being in the hotel lobby in Tokyo and just zooming with her and saying, you got to do this, and so she did. and so we collaborated on that one and ran that one together, working with some of my students and with the university, with some people locally. So and got that off the ground really, really quickly. And so yes, the B vitamin complex that we used was got a similar result to the broad spectrum. But what I think gets overlooked is that when people were asked to report whether or not they were how much better they thought they were relative to before they started taking the pills, and they no change, or a little bit worse, or a little bit better, or much better, or very much better. What we found with that scale was that there were more people reporting they were much to very much improved in the broad spectrum group relative to the B complex group. And we also found that with the earthquake as well. And so while I completely agree that the B complex did really well relative to the broad spectrum, and when you looked at a measure of stress, there was no group difference there, and they were pretty much following similarly. When you ask them about sort of this qualitative benefit, there were more people in the broad spectrum group that were reporting being much to very much improved. So that sort of subjective thinking of, do I think I'm better? Was more likely to happen with those who were on the broad spectrum. So I always say, B complex absolutely is a great way to go. And if you're stressed, and so that should be, hopefully would confer some benefit. But if there unlimited resources and finances were not an issue, I personally would go with the broad spectrum, and I would go with 4 pills a day as a minimum.
Yeah. Same for adolescents. I just see a little note in the comments.
I saw that question. 2 tablets in the morning. Well, it depends on what is being done. Like why whoever it is that asked this, Amanda, why you're giving the tablets to your adolescent. So if you're just doing it as an insurance policy, and to just think, okay, I've got an adolescent, they're growing, they might not always eat well, so I'll just make sure they take a multivitamin, then that's one thing. But if you're actually trying to target say moodiness, irritability, stress, I think 2 wouldn't be sufficient, to be honest. I would be going for a minimum of 4 pills, but even higher. Like in the study that we're currently running, we're trying to get those kids to take 4 3 times a day. Now, granted, they're being referred into the study for serious irritability, like lots of temper tantrums, just a constant feeling of grumpiness, grouchiness, really hard to manage their outbursts. So those are the kinds of kids we're targeting, but we are going for 12. So that gives you a bit of that sense of, is 2 a day 2 enough? I would say I don't think you'd notice anything, to be honest, but some people might. But if you're trying to target something, I would be looking to up that dose, and not to be scared of upping the dose. A lot of people are kind of worried about it being toxic. And I think one of the reasons why we get so worried about that is that we're so used to the 1 a day. So we're so used to the 1 a day that's sold in the supermarket that you think, oh my God, if I took 4 of those a day, well, I don't recommend 4 a day of the supermarket, because that would be a bad thing. But for these formulas that have been developed specifically with the brain in mind, they are well balanced so that you can up that dose without any of those nutrients getting into a toxic level, whereas that could happen with those for a 1 a day formula. So I wouldn't be doing it with those 1 a days, but I wouldn't be so scared about upping the dose of the formulas that we've studied, like Daily Essential Nutrients and Empire Plus. And it's kind of like, I see the supermarket variety kind of like the ultra processed food. It's kind of very equivalent. It's very low dose. Yeah. And so it's kind of like if we look at the micronutrient content of food, of ultra processed food, very low dose. So it's I guess I wouldn't, that's why I'm not a huge fan of those products, although I'm sure there's some that are good. But
there is, obviously as a practicing nutritionist, I often move towards the practitioner only supplements, and there is occasionally ones that are available over the counter that I actually say, no, you know what, keep taking that one. There are some that are definitely better made than others. Yeah.
So that you can purchase over the counter, definitely. But then when you think about them, some of those over counter ones, I'm thinking of, say, and I don't even know if you'd call the Be Pure line over the counter, but you can certainly buy those in pharmacies. The recommended dose for the Be Pure is 5 a day. So
so
it's
it
not one
takes
a day.
few to get it into those therapeutic levels. It has to be at the levels that you've shown in trials and that other research has shown to be therapeutic. So it's really interesting.
Do you want me to answer this question of the affordable brands in New Zealand that you would recommend for a 9-year-old? I mean, that's a tricky question for me to personally answer. And again, the question is kind of hard for me to know the context, because I don't know if it's about an insurance policy for a normal 9-year-old or whether or not it's about trying to support a 9-year-old who's going through a really difficult emotional time. So if it's an insurance policy, to be honest, the daily essential nutrients taken at a couple a day will last you a long time in New Zealand. It's 300, that would last you probably 3 or 4 months. And so you're not looking at a massive, I know they're expensive for a bottle, but if you're not taking very many because you're using it as an insurance purpose, then it's going to last you a long time. Oh, attention and stress. So in that case, the thing is there's no, all of the products that have ever been studied are in chapter 11. So if you look at if you jump forward to chapter 11, then everything that has ever been studied is in there. And so the only ones that have ever been studied from the supermarket for the treatment of stress is Blackmore's B vitamin complex and then Baraka. And just know that Baraka, the one that we used was a tablet form, which is actually hard to find because mostly Baraka seems to be sold as that effervescent version. And so then everybody goes, oh, but the effervescent version has got aspartame and all kinds of other evil things in there. And I would completely agree. We didn't study the effervescent version. We studied a pill version. And so you can get it, and you might have to go online to buy it. And working memory. I don't know. Working memory as we haven't directly studied working memory. We've definitely looked at attention and stress, and I have to, with attention, if it was a full-blown ADHD, we've been using the full dose and finding that's kind of what's necessary. So that's with an 8 or 9-year-old, I would be going with, we started at 8 pills a day, which is four twice a day in one of our studies that we published a few years ago. But for some of those kids, we still had to go up to 12. So just keep that in mind, that that's the kind of dose that you'd be targeting, even 8. And it takes a while for you to see the benefit on attention. And so you do have to give it a good go for a while. But I would be going for, about at least 4 twice a day with that age, and even possibly going higher. So sorry. I know it's a very difficult thing when it comes to affordability, and I'm absolutely sympathetic to that challenge. And I don't know what to say about that, because it requires an enormous overhaul of how supplements are regulated in New Zealand. It means that you need to get it registered with MedSafe or with Pharmac, and then Pharmac would then have to decide that they were going to fund it. And let's just say that I don't think that vitamins and minerals are going to be the highest priority for Pharmac to fund.
Certainly not in the current environment, with lots of other things needing to be funded right now.
Yeah.
And that kind of half answers a question I've been sent in here. With so much evidence in New Zealand, why has our government not acted on this?
Yeah, why haven't they? I don't know. If I knew, I would try to remove the barrier. I can't say it's because they haven't heard about it, because I suspect by now I'm an irritant, and that they probably have heard about me. I did have my 30 seconds with Jacinda of trying to push something, but she was a good politician and diverted me to a website. I cornered Andrew Little at some point when he was going to be the leader of the Labour Party, and told him all about our work. So I think they've, some of those important people have probably heard about it, but it's hard. It's hard to change our current paradigm at the end of the day. Our current paradigm, which is really being pushed at the moment, is counseling. It's counseling. That's going to be the solution. And even though I don't think that is a feasible solution for many people, in that it's just too great a problem that we'll never have enough counselors to do one-to-one therapy. And even then, when they do one-to-one therapy, at best 50% of them get better. It's going to be a while before that paradigm kind of shifts, because that's really being the push from the report that was done to the government on mental health
report. And I mean, it's such a valuable tool. I myself have benefited hugely from engaging in counselling services at times, and I think it's such a good tool in a toolbox. And it kind of makes me think of a discussion that we had quite robustly last week, where regarding medication as well for mental health conditions, and a sense from some people that perhaps some of the book could be a little bit anti-medication. And I know that's not the first time that you've heard that. So I thought, well, let's let you.
Sure, let me answer that one. I hope we didn't come across as anti-medication, although I can see why some of the information that we shared about the pharmaceutical industry might have been hard for some people to hear about if they hadn't heard about that before. And so I've done a lot of research on the pharmaceutical industry and some of the things they've gotten up to that are less than ideal. And so that was very sobering for me to learn about over the last, say, 15 years. I wasn't aware of some of the hidden data and the hiding of data that's been happening. And they're trying to rectify that now. And so things should start to get better. But there was a lot of time there where if a trial didn't show benefit of a medication, it simply didn't get published. And so that's something that we wrote about in the book, and some of the challenges of people having financial ties to the drug industry. And so that influences the way they report their findings. But the bottom line that I hope we did say in the book is that absolutely there are people who benefit from medications. 100%. I know them. I've heard from them. I'm familiar with people who do benefit from medications. And for those people, fantastic. That's great. You're one of, unfortunately, the luckier ones. And I say that because I'm familiar with the whole picture of the data. And so when I've looked at studies, and we had some data from 200 people who were taking antidepressants, and most of them were still depressed. And if there's enough studies like that you look at and start to go, well, hold on, why is it there are so many people who are still depressed when they're taking an antidepressant? You kind of have to stop and go, well, clearly the antidepressants aren't working for everybody. And so that's where I hope people understand where I'm coming from, is that I'm not here to tell people who are doing really well to come off of their medications, not at all. And we never want that message to get across, but that to be understanding and compassionate to the people who aren't doing as well on medications as we had hoped, and to say, we hear you, what you're experiencing is very real, and that we also want to acknowledge how hard it is to come off of those medications, because that's something that hasn't really been talked about until probably the last couple of years. And that's the issue with withdrawal, is that when people start to come off of the medications, many people experience really debilitating psychiatric symptoms that in the past were attributed to the symptoms just reemerging. But now we're starting to understand the biology of it and saying, actually, those symptoms that they're reporting are very real. And they have to do with the brain kind of going, oh, I was so used to this drug being there, and now it's been taken away. Your brain kind of goes through a very long period of readjustment. And during that long period of readjustment, you can experience a lot of challenging symptoms that can be so debilitating that you go back on the drug, because that alleviates them in the short term. But then at the end of the day, you may still be struggling with depression. So I just want to be really, I think those people deserve a voice, the people who aren't doing well on medication, and that they deserve an acknowledgement that their experiences are real, that they haven't done well with medications, and therefore we need to always be looking for new solutions, so that, and it's not that nutrients is going to help everyone. Of course not. We make that really clear in the book, is that not everyone has benefited from it. And goodness, believe me, I spent a lot of time, awake at night going, but why don't they work? And then going in and spending, hours and hours with a data set and trying to uncover if there's anything in our data that can help us better understand who this works for and who it doesn't work for and why it might be that way. And to date, we haven't really uncovered too many markers, although there might be some that we're starting maybe to reveal in our latest data set. So you will have to wait a little bit of time before we can reveal that. So I guess the bottom line there is that I don't want to, I certainly don't want to come across as anti-med, but I do want to also, though, acknowledge the very real thing is that when you start putting children on antidepressants, that worries me. And the reason that worries me is that the data really aren't that strong for using antidepressants with, that teenage group or children. And then knowing that it's hard to come off of them, we know those people stay on those drugs for a long time with little benefit, but not being able to come off of them. And believe me, I've come across like hundreds and hundreds of people who fall into that category. So I'd like it. And that's why I'm doing a study with adolescents. They are a very hard group to work with. But the reason that I decided, as maybe one of my last randomized control trials, I would target that group because I want those kids to have a different option than just medication.
It's amazing. So when's this research due to be available for us?
Oh, it takes ages to get research through the whole process. So I wouldn't be hopeful that it would probably be about it would be middle of 2022 if we're lucky.
Great. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that because that certainly sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So do you want me to reply to Karen, who says something about HRT? Well, I don't know much about, HRT you're looking at, that'll, I assume, will create hormonal changes and an antidepressant at the same time. Absolutely. And I completely agree with you that there's no support services out there. And that oftentimes, although I'm hoping it's getting a bit better, is that GPs are starting to understand that withdrawal thing is a real thing. And it's so important. The advice is that if you do make this decision to come off of medications, which is not something I'm telling anyone to do, but if that's a decision people make, then you've got to do it slowly because of that withdrawal. It's like coming off of anything else that's addictive. It's like coming off of, if you were stopping smoking, or if you were coming off of even some of those really difficult, like those opiates, pain relieving medication. If anyone's seriously addictive, we have to think about antidepressants in that similar type of class. And once we do that, then we're going to be far more kind and compassionate to people who experience withdrawal. So
answering you there, sorry,
yeah.
But in terms of the GPs that I've worked with, so obviously it's outside my scope of practice as a nutritionist to support people to reduce their medications. So I always need to refer back to their GP and work alongside them in that.
Absolutely.
And my experience has been that most are very, very willing because, and I think that, as I'm working robustly alongside them and it's a joint thing and it's done safely.
Exactly.
Often actually very open to it.
Yeah. And so hopefully if Karen got that kind of experience, then that would be much better, because
absolutely.
I agree that it can be very, very hard to do that without any support. Yeah.
And really important question there, I think, from Sally that rolls on alongside that in terms of, do nutrients still work alongside antidepressants?
Such a tricky thing. So that's also addressed in chapter 11. And that is this issue, the really, really tricky issue, which is that the observation that was made by psychiatrists really, really early on, so say 2 decades ago, so over 20 years ago, Charlie Popper, who is a psychiatrist who we talk about a bit in the book, he observed that when he used the nutrients alongside medications, there was something he called potentiation of the medication. And that means that the medication somehow got stronger and the side effects got bigger. And when that happens under normal circumstances, in that there isn't just suddenly all these nutrients that are being added, what could happen is that somebody will hear, oh, this, your symptoms have gotten worse. They tend to increase the dose of the medication, which is exactly the wrong thing to do. The medication needs to be slowly reduced alongside the prescriber. But it's counterintuitive for some GPs to do that. And so Empire, both Hardy's and True Hope both offer support for that kind of cross tapering. And so as the medications go down, then the nutrients go up. Now, this doesn't happen. I don't know if that's something, Bronwyn, that you've experienced in your own practice with, I don't know if you use combination nutrients or single nutrients, because some people don't report this, but it definitely happens with both Empire Plus and Daily Essential Nutrients. And it's also been found that if the dose is reduced, it tends to lead to greater improvement in the symptoms that are being targeted, which has got to be a good thing, because you get greater improvement in symptoms and fewer side effects at a lower dose. So all in all, it's a good thing, but it's a bit of a trickier thing. And it's not something that we do in any of our studies, because all of our studies are done with people who are medication free. So that's really, really important to know. And so applying the work that we did in our studies in New Zealand, you have to bear that in mind as a caveat and a limitation, because it doesn't necessarily apply to those people who are medicated. And the only way I can do that kind of study is to have a psychiatrist on board who's willing to reduce the dose. And that is a complicated thing, especially if you're doing it in a blinded trial.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of ethics involved in that. Absolutely. And, this does show up in lots of things. So I run for any client, whatever I'm recommending supplement wise, if they're on any medication at all, I run drug nutrient interaction checks. And quite often what gets flagged is things that are not going to interact negatively in terms of a negative chemical reaction or anything with their medication. It is really often to do with the fact that it can increase the action of the drug and therefore increase their side effects. So it is very interesting.
Okay.
It shows that a lot of nutrients have been shown to have that impact. So I think, really it's something, Sally, in that question that's to be done carefully if you are using medication and with specialist support alongside.
Exactly. And the companies offer that support to the GPs. So they are very, very happy to be contacted by GPs to offer that kind of training. And they definitely have the skill for that, because they've been working in this area for so long.
Absolutely. So,
it's kind of like
if you decide to do it through them, they always get permission from your GP. So if the GP doesn't, is it's not their interest area, or they don't want to do that, then they just need to give signed permission to these companies that will support you to do that.
Exactly. And it's all about trying to do that safely. And so, if anybody's ever been on a drug where they said don't take grapefruit, it kind of might be operating in a similar way potentially. That grapefruit one thing is that grapefruit can affect the metabolism of drugs. Do the nutrients affect the metabolism of the drugs through the liver? But another thing that might be going on is that you're providing the brain with all the ingredients it needs to make all the neurotransmitters that are also being influenced by the medication that you're taking. And so you're suddenly changing a lot of variables, and you're probably changing the homeostasis of your overall, how you've been operating up until then.
Amazing. Julia, I want to thank you so much for your time tonight. I'd love to let you get back to see your family. I know you've been back to back before you've come to us as well, but huge amount of information that you've shared. And I think to me, this just provides so much hope that it's such a fabulous tool to add to the toolbox. As you said, it's not the single solution.
Nope.
And nothing is, but we need more tools that more people can access to work. And I'm just passionate that this is a very, very, very vital tool that we add to our toolkit. So,
well, thank you it was a pleasure to talk to the group, and I hope you continue to enjoy reading the book. And if you like it, please review it on Amazon.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that you don't need to have bought it from Amazon to do the review on Amazon. You may have trouble if you don't normally buy anything from Amazon, or you haven't bought anything recently, but either reviewing it on Amazon or reviewing it on Goodreads. And Julia, am I correct that part of the benefit of that is that, obviously reviews sell books. If books sell well, then it's much harder for people to ignore the benefits as well, including politicians, etc. So this is one of the ways that we can make a have our own impact on this becoming
that's what
visible.
I understand is that, yeah. And so we've both been told we have to push the Amazon reviews, as much as I hate doing that, but I had a chance. You guys have all got the book. So if you can do that, that would be great.
Amazing, indeed. I'll put that in the email tomorrow as well, just to remind people.
Thank you.
And for next week, we're looking at chapters 8 through 12. So it's a few more pages than the previous weeks, but there is a whole chapter of recipes in there. So I would love it if people could give a recipe a try and post a photo in the Facebook group to encourage others. That would be great. And I'm sure you all join me very much in thanking Julia for her passion, her knowledge, her expertise, and her inspiration and her hope that you've provided us all tonight.
Great. Well, thanks so much for inviting me, Bronwyn.
Oh, thank you for being here. And we'll see you all next week.